Hello, POV UCC family. Before I share this sermon with you, I just want to offer a disclaimer. Earlier this week, so many pastors like me were scrambling to figure out what to say in this moment and how to say it when our worship services have been canceled. And so many of my colleagues and friends have been trying to learn new technology and come up with new ways to connect and share. And I'll admit, I felt pressured too. I wanted to write the perfect sermon for you in this particular moment. And yet, I also realized there was so much on my plate that there was no way I was going to be able to do that. And I decided it was important to model the kind of calm and peace that I'm going to preach about in this very sermon. And so what I decided to do was to share something with you that I wrote back in 2012. I've reworked it a bit, but I offer it to you in hopes that it will speak a word of peace to you, but that might also remind you that when we are tempted to do all the things all at once in this anxious time, sometimes it's enough to just do what we can. So would you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Back in the summer of 2012, Mark and I were delighted to find that TED Talks had become part of Netflix. In case you've never heard of them, TED, which is an acronym for Technology, Entertainment, and Design, is a nonprofit that formed almost 30 years ago, dedicated to inviting the leading minds in various fields to share what they call ideas worth spreading. At TED conferences, innovative people from all walks of life come together and give short lectures of all kinds on different subjects. One of those talks was by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, author of a book called My Stroke of Insight. Back in 1996, Dr. Taylor was a 37-year-old brain scientist, a neuroanatomist to be specific, at Harvard Medical School, when one morning she experienced a sharp pain behind her left eye. It turned out she was having a massive stroke brought about by a blood vessel that exploded on the left side of her brain. Because of the way her stroke took place, and also because of her knowledge of the brain, Dr. Taylor had the unique experience of being more aware of what was happening to her than most of us would have been. She said as she realized that something was very wrong, she went back and forth between thinking, whoa, I have a problem, I have to get help, and wow, this is really cool. Taylor categorizes those different voices as representing two sides of the brain, left and right. As you've probably heard before, scientists believe that the two halves of our brains perform very different functions, the left being more logical and the right being more creative. Dr. Taylor says the two halves of our brain have very different personalities. Here's how she explains it. Our right hemisphere is all about this present moment. It's about right here, right now. It thinks in pictures and it learns kinesthetically through the movement of our bodies. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what it smells like and tastes like, what it feels like and sounds like. Our left hemisphere, on the other hand, is a very different place. Our left hemisphere thinks linearly and methodically. It's all about the past and it's all about the future. Our left hemisphere is designed to take that enormous collage of the present moment and start picking details and details and more details and then categorizing and organizing all that information. It associates it with everything we've learned in the past, and it projects into the future all our possibilities. And our left hemisphere thinks in language. It's that ongoing brain chatter that connects me and my internal world to my external world. It's that little voice that says, hey, you should remember to pick up bananas on your way home and then eat them in the morning. It's that calculating intelligence that reminds me when I have to do laundry, she says. Dr. Taylor then goes on to describe what it was like for her as the stroke progressed to lose the voice of her left brain. She says it was like someone pressed a mute button on a remote control, and all the brain chatter inside her head went silent. After the initial shock of the silence wore off, she says, she was overcome with a sense of peace and calm. All her stress melted away, and she was filled with euphoria. She affectionately calls that place La La Land, and she said she was just floating blissfully there when all of a sudden her left brain would come back online and interrupt the peace, yelling, "Hey, we are having a stroke! We gotta get help!" Back and forth the voices went, until finally, she says, the left side went offline for good, and she lost consciousness. When I heard Dr. Taylor describe her experience of her stroke, I thought about our story today of the disciples in the boat with Jesus. At the beginning of their journey, things probably seemed relatively peaceful. Jesus had just finished giving his own kind of TED Talk from a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And you might say Jesus was a right brain kind of teacher because rather than inundate his listeners with empirical data, Jesus spoke to them in stories, painting pictures with his words. Instead of a list of commandments, Jesus offered parables about seeds and how they grow, reminding them that even tiny mustard seeds can become great plants. After his seminar by the sea was over, Jesus and the disciples got in their boats and began to head across the water. I like to imagine them all enjoying some time for reflection after Jesus' teaching, pondering all that he has said. And all is well until out of the blue a storm blows in. And immediately the disciples are yanked out of all that right brain creative thinking and into some major left brain chatter. What's going on? Where did this storm come from? What should we do? The boat, it's taking on water. It's sinking. Buckets, we need buckets. Quick, start bailing water. At some point in their frantic, frightened panic, the disciples notice that Jesus is not helping them. In fact, he's doing what most ministers I know do after they've preached a big sermon. He's taking a nap. Despite all the chaos around him, Jesus was in La La Land, sleeping through the storm. The disciples have to shake him to wake him up so that they can ask him accusingly, "Don't you care if we drown?" Then the story says, Jesus woke up, spoke to the winds and the sea, and quieted the storm, saying, "Peace, be still." Into a setting filled with danger and fear, Jesus spoke words of peace, and it's almost as if the peace that dwelled within him transformed the world around him. The storm subsided as quickly as it had blown in. Suddenly, everything was calm. Now, it would have been nice if the disciples' spirits had been as soothed as the raging storm, but it didn't turn out that way. You see, when they woke Jesus up, they probably weren't expecting him to be able to control nature. You might recall that in Mark's gospel, the disciples are a little slow on the uptake when it comes to realizing who Jesus is. They probably just wanted him to notice that they were sinking and for him to help them bail water out of the boat. But Jesus shocks them and calms the wind and the waves. Once the meteorological crisis is averted, the disciples have a new source of distress, and their left brains chime in with a fresh set of questions. How did he do that? Who is this guy? Should we be in this boat with him? Where is he taking us? What does all this mean? I don't blame them. I'm a pretty left-brain person myself. I try to live in that peaceful, calm place that Dr. Taylor describes as her right brain. But the truth is, I'm usually lucky if I can visit there for a few minutes. Before long, my left brain chatter kicks in. What's for dinner? Did you send that email? You need to get started on your sermon. I think we're out of milk. Have you called your mother? At times, it can be relentless. That internal brain noise is bad enough when everything is normal. But in the last several days, the volume feels like it's been turned up to 11, as they say in the movie Spinal Tap. The anxiety, uncertainty, and fear that come with a global crisis, like the COVID-19 pandemic, can send our minds into a frenzy. There's so much new and upsetting information bombarding us by the minute, it's hard to know how to process it. We do our best to stay calm and make wise decisions, but images of empty shelves and long lines threaten any sense of calm we can find. And there's so much we don't know. Perhaps that's the most unsettling of all, throwing our left brains into overdrive as we try to make sense of all we read and hear and feel. Of course, it's an oversimplification to blame all our stress on the left brain. There's no question we need both halves to survive, as individuals and as organizations. As Dr. Taylor acknowledges, we can't live in la-la land all the time. But what she does suggest, and I believe what it helps us to remember now, is that when our left brains get hyperactive, as so many of them are right now, we can learn to step to the right of that chatter and try to cultivate the sort of peace and harmony that she experienced when her left brain temporarily shut down. So, short of having a stroke, how do we do that? For us as Christians, today's story from Mark offers us some hints for how we might live more peacefully in the midst of life's storms. First and foremost, we can remember that Jesus is in the boat with us. Now, we might feel as though he's sleeping. We might, like the disciples, feel abandoned and want to yell, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" But we can rest assured that his silence does not mean we are alone. When the storms of our lives are raging, when the chatter in our heads keeps us awake at night, we can ask the one who sleeps through storms to calm the winds and waves that are churning inside us and around us. When our minds are filled with worries about the future, questions we can't answer, decisions that are hard to make, we can remember the promise of Jesus. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. We hear and believe those words, but receiving that peace is hard to do, especially in times like these. As we pause to remember that Jesus is with us, we can remember that there are others in the boat with us too. Other disciples with whom we sail these stormy seas, and they can help bail us out when our spirits start to sink. This is part of what it means to live in Christian community, to remind each other that even when life brings challenges that are more than we think we can bear, we are not alone. We are in the boat together, and God is with us. God will not abandon us. We know that there will always be storms. Living in faith does not mean we get to live in la-la land, but we can take comfort that when the winds and waves are raging, the peace that Jesus promises is there. Perhaps we need to awaken it, to rouse it from the place where it lies sleeping and cry out for help. We can pause, even if just for a moment, to pray, to be still, to breathe. We can reach out to those around us and share our love, our worry, our fear, and hold one another close in prayer. And in all things, we can listen for the voice of God, speaking to us just as Jesus spoke to the storm. Peace, be still. May you know God's peace in a powerful way in the days and weeks ahead. Amen.